Good morning. I'm Gautam Paul, one of the co-founders of NZ Blockchain Forums, and welcome to the fourth episode of Blockchain Bytes. Today, we've got three professionals involved in having a discussion and debate around decentralized technology and agriculture, or the agribusiness in New Zealand. We have Henry Ines, who is the CEO of Chainparency. He's also the CEO and on the steering committee of GoChain. Chainparency is a digital modernization solutions and modular blockchain technology applications turnkey solutions provider. Chris Claridge is the CEO of Potatoes New Zealand and also the chairperson of the Trust Alliance here in New Zealand. He's an agribusiness leader. And Brendan O'Connell is the CEO of AgriTech New Zealand and the founder of Cronora Consulting. Again, they promote opportunities and challenges raised by agriculture here in New Zealand. So thank you all for joining the conversation. And I'd like to start off just by throwing into the mix the fact that Jack Dorsey has publicly announced he's leaving Twitter. And one of his other side businesses, Square, he is renaming Block because he's going all into crypto and blockchain with regards to that. So over to you, Henry, if there's anything you'd like to sort of respond to on that from that point of view.
Just generally, I would say this is continuing, I think, a trend in recent years. There's a tremendous, I would say, enthusiasm right now. There's always been there from a retail perspective in terms of cryptocurrencies and what that sort of the empowerment of that and its impact on the finance industry. But we're seeing, I think there's been a tipping point now too, where the underlying technology, blockchain technology, is really starting to shine across so many different industries. So, I think all of us in the business and industry now are seeing there's just a lot of movement that's happening across the board. And so, having Jack focus more on the blockchain crypto part of it, I think that's great and exciting.
Mm-hmm. And from the point of view of New Zealand, Chris and Brendan, obviously you guys represent, the potato industry here is the largest vegetable crop by value and volume. And Brendan, I think you have over 300 members as part of AgriTech New Zealand. How seriously do you think they should be sitting up and paying attention to blockchain and traceability applications in terms of what we can do here within New Zealand to really ramp up our productivity and therefore profitability?
I think, without doubt, the technologies we're talking about are exactly designed for purpose for what agricultural value chains require and what we're trying to achieve there. So the technology is just right on target. But speaking as somebody who's a technology champion in many different ways, I still need to say it's just technology, and so having the right tools as fit for purpose as they are is just one part of the mix, and what you really need is the context to which that technology is being applied and the deep understanding. I think some of the biggest challenges are around understanding why the legacy systems, how they're set up, and what the changes are required to really leverage these type of technologies. I mean, they're obviously designed for trust. They're designed for exactly the purpose that we've been struggling with other systems, and have inefficient contracts, inefficient middlemen involved, and so it's the perfect solution for that. And we just need to look at how we move past the legacy systems, which is why we're really keen on the work that Chris and the guys are doing at the Trust Alliance here in New Zealand, because they're bringing not only an understanding of the potential of that technology, but a deep understanding of the legacy systems, the problems that need to be resolved, and the relationships that need to be addressed around that. So that's my rugby pass over to you, Chris, just to bring to light what it looks like in reality in terms of New Zealand's use of these technologies across our value chains.
Kia ora, Brendan. Thanks for that. So I'd like to echo some of the things that Brendan has said, that this is the difficulty with any new technology is people begin to concentrate on the actual mechanics of the technology rather than focusing on what problems does it solve. And there gets to be a sort of divide between those people who understand and can visualize how the technologies may be applied and those that don't really understand it. So what we see in the Blockchain Alliance, the Trust Alliance, sorry, in New Zealand, where we've brought together 30 players across the primary sector so that we can look at the intersect of the digital world with the primary sector. And now we've got ourselves into a position where we can digitally touch each farmer, say 5 to 6 times, we think. So which allows us to look to how to improve efficiencies in order that data gets captured once, permissioned, and then utilized for the problems that we see, which is basically around trust, that there's a diminution of trust worldwide, that consumers no longer necessarily trust the product they have, and they want to move from what is effectively a brand promise to a brand proof. Now the mechanics, the tech, that I think is secondary to the people and getting parties to work together in cooperation, utilizing this technology and still retaining their own commercial drivers and their own commercial independence. That I think is the hard bit. Technologies get to a tipping point where they reach, the laws are 17.5% around adoption rates. So we've got 40,000 farmers in New Zealand. So we're looking, how do we reach 6,000 of those? But I don't think blockchain weirdly is, and the discussion of the technology actually helps. I think it's more about what problems does it solve and how does it benefit. So it has to be flipped on its head away from a technology discussion to a benefit and a solution. Otherwise, we get stuck in, how does the algorithms work, or how does the proof of stake, and we go down the rabbit hole of the technology.
Absolutely. I think, Chris, that you've really hit the nail on the head there, because it is, from the point of view of the users, it's always going to have to be about what's in it for me. And one of the questions I want to sort of just pick up on there is, do you think we're doing enough here in New Zealand from an education point of view in terms of informing everybody about what is available out there, why it's so useful, why it should really be looked at, and why now? Or do you think more can be done?
Sorry, is that directed at me, Paul? Is it?
It's all of you. So
okay. I can leap in there. Part of me, so in the 90s when the internet hit, I had the fortune or misfortune of being in the tertiary education system. So we used to get together groups of people and we'd go in computer rooms and we'd go, okay, we're going to go on the internet now, and you type in http:///. And then they go, well, what have I just typed in? And you'd say hypertext transfer protocol, and they go, what is that? And you'd go down this rabbit hole of explaining how the technology works. I think showing concrete evidence and moving it from this abstract concept to concrete evidence of it working, delivering solutions is where we have to get to. I don't think it necessarily needs education in terms of explaining to people what the equivalent of HTTP is, what is a proof of stake, what is a proof of work, these types of things. We have to actually get tools working, because at the end of the day, most people in business, most people in the way they operate, don't really care what the technology is. They just want things to work, and they want it to work more efficiently.
Exactly. I mean, I started off my commercial career at the beginning of the 90s, just as the internet took off, and no one even questions the internet. It is what it is. And I think, and this is a great point to bring you in, Henry, because I mean, we're talking about case studies where you're talking about people, all they care about is how does it work and why is it useful to me? So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I want to, it's a great point and great question. And I want to build off a little bit of what Chris was talking about. So there's blockchain technology and the promise of blockchain technology. I think we can all agree that as a data structure, it brings tremendous new innovation and opportunity to positively impact many new industries. But I think a lot of this now is timing and it's not just sort of a theoretical tool anymore, actually. What I think has happened, and it's really accelerated in the recent period, is that we've moved to a point now where I think this technology, this tool can actually be deployed, not only be deployed, but in a manner that's economically feasible and very important, particularly as we're talking about supply chains, one that can be inclusive. So I think blockchain, say a few years back, it was still difficult for people to get their mind around it. And also there was a question of cost. How do we ensure compliance and use it? How can everybody use it? There's sort of a UI UX problem, right? But I think we are at a point now, definitely and anecdotally from what we're seeing, enterprises are definitely using the technology now. And we certainly, from our perspective, we believe that technology can be deployed at scale. So this is really important. And so we're obviously very bullish and very much encouraging all enterprises who are curious or believe there's a use case for blockchain technology to go out and use it now, test it out, because it's now beyond just some sort of theoretical abstract. It is something that enterprises and governments are actually using right now. And I guess your point, Gautam, there's, we're seeing it across multiple industries right now. Certainly in the agriculture commodity sector, when you're talking about supply chain, that's happening. Obviously finance on a DeFi perspective, that's been going on for some time. Just a few weeks back, we were in Dubai, where we made an announcement with the Colombian government. The Colombian government boldly and is really moving forward to reimagine what the mining sector is going to look like for them. So they're using blockchain technology now going forward. They're going to be using blockchain for mining titles registry. They're going to be tokenizing entire mining projects and assets. And they'll be using the technology for granular track and trace. So this is something that's not just happening, in one or two sectors. It's really happening, across the planet. So I think this is very exciting. And I think importantly for the deployment of the technology, the cost point is ready to go. It's ready to be used and deployed by enterprises. So this is something that I really challenge and encourage leaders to get out there to evaluate and really put the technology to use.
Thank you, Luke. Brendan, you look like you wanted to sort of just jump in and comment on something.
No, I was just thinking as Henry was talking about that affordability piece. I mean, any new technology, of course, goes through its own sort of maturity cycles, and I think we are at a point of seeing real world applications that we can all sort of point to and understand. We've heard of the work that Frontier and HSBC did in terms of their bill of lading piece, and that was a sort of a real world example. I know from sessions, Chris, you might have to improve my accuracy on this, but I heard of some of the Australian examples that the Melbourne team told us about in terms of something that farmers here would really understand well in terms of access to water rights and just the processes that have been the traditional processes, of which there'd be examples across multiple sectors of where there's a form to fill out, an approval process to go through, and even if it is digitized, it still takes time to go through various approval steps. And yet the blockchain enabled equivalent of that is a fully automated and trusted system. So rather than looking for water rights and waiting for 2 or 3 months to go through the process, you can literally automate the process of on-demand water rights, tokens being raised, and it just flowing through the systems with all the right approval and traceability. So from a farmer's perspective, you go from an approval process that would take months to an approval process that just happens in the background, and yet you're still fully compliant with all of the regulations and have the traceability behind it. And so there are real world examples of these things. I mean, they're probably still rare enough that they get talked about in the press, and they get talked about because they're unique. So the real great state will be when we don't hear about them anymore because it's just normal practice. And I guess the only breaks or the only pace that gets set is it's interesting, Henry, that you raised the affordability piece. I'm sure that's been a factor. I think the affordability is probably sits hand in hand with biggest challenge or the biggest break, which is just the replacement of legacy systems and the time and the priority and the understanding that needs to go. So it's, again, that's the sort of the human commitment rather than the technology capability or affordability even.
Yeah. And Brendan, if I can just comment on that, I think there is a component of replacing legacy systems, but I would say there's even a step before that. At least from what we're seeing is that you really want to just take blockchain and as an overlay on top of the existing framework, right? Because realistically, what's happening is you want to sort of plug in blockchain with the legacy systems as needed. Most companies probably won't just rip out their entire infrastructure. It's the question is, how do we leverage the existing framework where we can affordably add, plug in blockchain technology, and you still are using your normal systems, but you're making a decision that there are certain bits of data that we want to put on chain for auditability, right? And for data integrity. So it really is just augmenting your existing systems and basically adding a blockchain element to it. That would be probably the fastest way to drive adoption, across the planet. So
that makes sense.
I think just picking up on what Henry's saying here is that you can run blockchain alongside legacy systems reasonably easily. One of the things is that we're starting to think about is not just deploying the blockchain, because deploying a blockchain system alongside one value chain, and the uniqueness of New Zealand is there's a high degree of intersection between different supply chains, parties who intersect with different supply chains. So a potato grower is a dairy farmer, they are a wheat farmer, they are an arable cropping farmer, they're a meat farmer. They don't have the high degree of hyper specialization that large agribusinesses have internationally. Still relatively family-based operations, which are small. We don't have a high degree of large commercial players, large-scale farming production systems. If you then add to our cooperative model, which is quite unique in the world, is that there's a lot of farming co-ops. Again, our proportion of co-ops in the primary sector is far higher than anywhere else. So we've got an opportunity to avoid what could be a risk in blockchain, is the rise of intermediaries in the blockchain world. Absolutely. Where you have one chain operated by one party, another chain operated by another party, and in effect, you've simply transferred interoperability down to another layer, which is the blockchain layer, without getting the governance of how those blockchains will arise, and then the capture by organizations or individuals or offshore parties, where those tokenized economies we lose sovereignty over them, which is one of the key risks that we face as the primary sector in New Zealand, that we don't quite necessarily, I see the risks arising from offshore parties gaining control of our tokenization economies when the blockchains start to run. And that's something that as a country we need to be aware of. It's not blockchain that's the issue here. It's the loss of digital sovereignty. And we experienced that in our media world, where we lost media sovereignty to the offshore large players like Facebook, Google, YouTube, the plethora, and they gutted out our media industry. This could actually happen in the same way to the primary sector, because it's the last bastion of non-digitization. So how do we construct something that still retains public-private utilities that work together? It's a real challenge, because the risk we run is large players come in and the tokenization of the information happens without us even participating in it.
Yeah, I guess I'd add, as part of that discussion, is there's a concern around perhaps the commoditization of data or data ownership. But I think one of the real excitement and promises for blockchain technology is also the idea about ownership of that data, right? And so for the farmers, and when we're seeing this now, there's very much the idea now, how do we include that first mile farmer or any farmer, large or small, let them own their data, tokenize the data at their farms, and then from that perspective, if they want to monetize on that data, that's their choice because they own that data. No one else should have access to that data. We're seeing lots of projects like this coming up now to essentially empower farmers to be able to participate in, potentially new monetization opportunities, or at least to be included in existing monetary frameworks. So, this is something I think that's really great, because the word is overused, but it's true. There's a real air of democratization right now that's happening for a lot of the first mile, small scale harvester producers. They should be able to participate in these new economies. And I think blockchain is really good for that.
Mm-hmm. So long as the governance and the tokenization models that sit underneath it allow the participation of those players and they're not captured internationally. That is the risk, because the carrot is, you get to control your data, but it's then put into a chain or an environment in which nominally they might control the data, but it's unable to be ported anywhere else. There's no parachain models. The structure, the governance structure of whatever tokenized model they're sitting inside, they don't necessarily have control of that. Now, that's quite a high level discussion to have, and I don't think we're quite there in New Zealand. To be brutally honest, I think we all understand to a degree blockchain and the mechanics of it, but it's the governance of it that's my major concern, is who is at the apex, because what we saw with the internet was the promise of this devolved system where you could all be part of it, and then it was swiftly captured by very large players who got in and took what was basically an egalitarian type technology model, which was what the internet proposed to do, and captured it and walled it off very, very quickly. Ironically, I believe the risk is blockchain could do that even faster. And that's the risk we play, because how you mint the tokens, how you run the treasuries, how you work at that governance level, who sets the macro rules at that central point. Henry, you well know the power that is in those strategic apexes. Now, that's the bit I think we really need to have a discussion about, not the bit about the blockchain. Blockchain's done. We understand how it works. The mechanics are there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of graduates. Thousands of graduates even in New Zealand understand how it works. So I think the conversation has to move on to how do we govern and run this, not how we execute it, because the execution is going to happen. It's irrevocable. But it's how do we, and this is over to you, Henry. Where do you see the risks emerging, to ask you a question, in the construction of the DAOs and the tokenized economies that sit inside them?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a critical question, and I think everyone is evaluating. I mean, it's still early now, right? I think everyone's evaluating each protocol, the governance framework around the protocol, and even for that, I think when you're talking about industry, we certainly push for a public ledger, but many companies aren't prepared for that, and they want sort of a permissioned environment and how they're going to control that data. So yeah, I think this is early, but we certainly can look at the industries, and if it's product driven, you want a framework that's very public, and then from a governance standpoint, you got to find the right protocol. That I think there's still a lot of debate about which protocol has the right governance framework, and whether it's whales dominating or if it's proof of stake. Is it who has sort of that governance control over it, and how truly decentralized is the protocol? I'm not sure anyone is going to really agree on that yet. I think everyone just wants to make sure the protocol is secure, and also from there to be able to start deploying that and seeing the benefits from it in the industry. But I think many protocols we're going to undergo. It's going to take some time to shake out and see which protocols make the most sense for the industry and the use case.
Yeah, it's going to be, so one of the interesting challenges is if you get a blockchain or a protocol released for one supply chain, for example, the dairy supply chain in New Zealand, that can't necessarily intersect and work with other supply chains. So you end up creating a network of blockchains that can't actually operate together. Or the analogy would be you've got railway tracks that are all different gauges, and you can't actually leverage the real power of what the technology promises, because in a sense you echo the silos, but just down at you might get it across one supply chain, but it doesn't necessarily get the leverage of the real promise of decentralization. And that level of portability, I'm not sure is something that we've really started to see with the technology. So the portability from one chain to another. So if I as a dairy farmer operate on this blockchain, I have this data, how do I get it across to another blockchain? So my geospatial unit, which I put in there, sitting in GoChain, or how do I then put it over somewhere else, like Omni or wherever, any of the other ones that will emerge over time. That to me is the real discussion, not the delivery of the technology to the participants, because it'll happen anyway. And I don't think we need to even, that's going to happen. It's just going to start rolling out. The thing is, the interoperability between the blockchains is the bit that to me is the real concern. And we don't seem to have the level of international agreements on that we perhaps had with the emergence of the internet. Just interested in your opinion on that, Henry.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. 100% interoperability is going to have to be the way, right? I mean, when a consumer goes to scan a particular consumer packaged good or protein, whatever it is, they're not going to care what protocol it's running on. They're just going to want to know the traceability, right? And it may actually in the future run across 3 or 4 different protocols. There's no doubt that interoperability is not only necessary, but it is going to happen. And it's already happening now. There's a lot of different initiatives ongoing now to enable different protocols to communicate with each other. But I would say until you reach that standard, that doesn't mean we don't go ahead and leverage the benefits of blockchain, because there are many, right? Even if you're talking about international standards, put blockchain aside, there's still a lot of standards that probably need to merge instead of having so many different standards out there. That is already ongoing, right, in addition to interoperability for blockchain. So to not take action in the interim until that interoperability is fully there, I think there's a lot of tremendous opportunities that are being missed. And I mean, at least again, from what we're seeing, we are seeing already tremendous efficiencies, lots of opportunities to empower, all stakeholders in the supply chain. And also, look, there's tremendous existing inefficiencies with legacy systems, period, right? I mean, blockchain can start to help, fill in some of those gaps, drive inefficiencies, and at the same time, create new economies. So this should already be happening. And of course, as the industry starts to further accelerate and new technologies are deployed, we're going to get there, interoperability. That's going to have to happen. But I still think there's plenty of things that we can do right now to make it a win-win for everybody.
Thank you, Henry. That's a great answer. I'm just, because my understanding was that obviously interoperability is the big point of all of it, and it is actually being worked on right now. Are you saying we're still, how long do you think it's going to be before we will be there, or is it just, it's how long is a piece of string?
Yeah, it's going to take time. I mean, just even right now, if you look at everything from supply chains to where can I view my NFTs? I mean, all these things right now, these are questions that are being raised, right? And if you are someone holding a particular asset on a protocol, you want to be able to, make sure that asset is portable. If it's an NFT, you might want to be able to view it on different programs. And so these are questions that everyone is sort of grappling with right now, right? So the industry is definitely working on it. And I think as it shakes out in the coming years, certain protocols are certainly going to not only survive, will thrive better than others. And probably you'll see a lot of consolidation that starts to happen. But as I said, in the interim, there's still plenty of innovation and plenty of impact that's going to come from blockchain, and we're certainly already seeing it. So
part of the issue, Henry, we've got is because it's early stages in New Zealand, is it's both our weakness and our strength, because what we can do is theoretically look at the problems that are occurring around the world and how do we, because what we don't want to do is go down a legacy blockchain system that ends up not, that's been a couple of things, and then it becomes an excuse not to do it. So the logic, and so that question about how we get, say, one blockchain, say a Go chain, working with over here with another chain, how do we get them joining together? How does that work where you get, portability? How does, if you have DIDs running on different systems, how does that peer-to-peer DID stuff work? So all of that types of rules and governance is not really there. The Trust Alliance is endeavouring to go there, but capability and capacity, Brendan, is a key issue in the New Zealand primary sector. We may get it in one sector with dairy, which has got enough grunt, but then they'll end up building their own proprietary chain, and it won't be open. I can tell you now, we'll have different proprietary chains in New Zealand. We absolutely will get there.
I mean,
they won't talk to each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raised, there's a few issues there, right? One, I mean, again, yes, interoperability, but you're raising the issue that probably a lot of these either cooperatives or federated companies, they're going to build their own permission networks, right? So basically, that's going to be like a hyperledger type solution, totally private, right? And that's fine, I think, to start with for certain, because they just don't want, they want that privacy, right? But from our perspective, eventually, if you really want to have the promise of blockchain, it's got to be public. That's one thing.
Yeah.
The second thing, though, is like just really quickly to add, though, is that I think where the industry is right now, it's not even a question. I mean, at least from what we've been experiencing, it's not even a question that board and C-level is afraid of interoperability. They couldn't even get past cost. They couldn't even, like, they've tried to pilot some blockchain solution. They're like, now we kind of quit because it seemed too expensive and we really couldn't even scale it, right? I mean, they haven't even got to interoperability. They're still stuck on scale, like cost and scalability. So, I mean, I think if we can get past that, which is what we're starting to see now, and obviously from our perspective, that's how we're trying to say, listen, now is the time to adopt it, because we do have the scalability. The cost is down. You can actually deploy this.
Yeah.
So we're starting to see companies actually do it now, because before they couldn't even get past the cost element. Now, for sure, going forward, they're going to want that data to be able to be interoperable, possibly on multiple networks and multiple protocols. I do think, I mean, the industry is working on it, and even that on the whole layer 2 thing is still being worked out right now too, right? So the industry is working on it. I think we're going to get there, but I think just to get past that first hurdle is already going to be very important to drive this adoption of the technology.
I mean, that's been very, very insightful and very engaging. Henry, Chris, and Brendan, thank you so much for episode 4. And I am so looking forward to the 3 of us, or 4 of us, getting together again on the 28th of February. Henry, obviously you'll be dialing in, but fingers crossed, Chris and Brendan, you'll be actually at Toy Toy in Hastings, and we can eyeball each other and have carry on this discussion and make sure that we get to the point of all of this. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thanks so much.
Cheers, Gautam. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Discussion.
Bye-bye. Bye.